So Amy brings up a good point that I really hadn't delved into. And so I see where the 200,000 doesn't line up, and I understand Laura Smith's response. And so in case these words weren't exactly used, but it's my understanding that when you say the $200,000 is from the first budget to the budget we're contemplating now, you're talking the first budget is really the budget that the department heads and staff put together. You all have a process through the department heads. You take numbers from the departments, you put that together, you package that together, and then that comes to the council as kind of a starting point for these 2013 budget cycles. And so what you're saying is, from that initial budget that staff put together this spring, $200,000 has been earmarked or eyed to be cut from that.
Correct.
That's why the numbers don't exactly match on from 2012 to 2013. I don't remember as a council, and I apologize if we did discuss it, where that $200,000 number came from and why we decided 200 versus 300 versus 100. Can you give us any perspective on why 200?
On it. What's that, Pat? Did Mike come up with those?
I think we just proposed
Trying to get the
number
reserves up.
I mean, we had some discussions about where, you know, wanting, I mean, think if you go back and look at the original budget, I believe the ending fund balance for 2013 was sitting at about $850,000. So we heard very clearly part of, you know, a very specific goal to get and maintain that fund balance at least 1.3 million. So we were looking at then, you know, how do we get there? And so some of that was accomplished through a reduction in personnel services, contractuals, and commodities.
You took cuts across the board.
Capital outlay. I mean, everything, you know, the transfers, everything really kind of took a hit to get to, you know, that closer to this ending fund balance in north 1.2286 here. But that's sort of what drove how we spread that. So the fund balance target was probably the biggest driver in backing into the rest of the general fund numbers for things.
And so looking at the numbers in front of us to kind of match up with this resolution at a high level, the 2018 budget is projected to build back fund reserves, adding $200,000, a little over $200,000 to fund reserves.
Correct.
So if we didn't do the 200 on personnel, we basically lose the fund reserves that we're building back. If we didn't do the 100 on commodities, we'd be in the negative again. And so I'm guessing, based on past years, what staff has done as well, we agreed that we needed more reserves. So staff went and looked at the budget and said, well, we think we can find 200 here, and we think we can find 100 here without major pain. And so that's why those numbers were kind of plugged in for council's consideration.
Right.
This is all being driven by starting to build back that fund balance.
Correct.
And this builds on to, in 2011 and 2000, the reduction in overall operating budget, the exercise that we went through. I'm recalling it was 500,000 for the 2011 budget, and it may have been the same amount for 2010. So I mentioned that just by way of context, that the deeper you cut, the more you cut, the harder it is to cut without significantly impacting the quality of services that we can deliver.
Well, and actually, I mean, depending on how, you know, if you look at, for example, even this fund balance language, I mean, the 2012 budget was approved without a fund balance of 1.3 million. So, you know, technically, if we say hold our current general fund balance steady, that would be our 2011 fund balance. So we basically are actually having to add a little bit more than that. So, I mean, certainly that clarity helps, but that's kind of how we looked at it. So that fund balance target was driving.
So one more point I want to make sure I understand on this is that, so when staff put together the initial 2013 budget, which is what we're talking about trying to come up or down from.
Correct.
It's my understanding that staff kind of projected a status quo type budget in terms of we're not adding positions to the org chart, we're not adding significant raises or benefits, we're trying to stay steady and tread water, so to speak, with our personnel costs.
Right.
So those were the initial projections brought back to staff, or back to council, and this $200,000 decrease from those initial projections is to say, well, we really need to find a way to cut somewhere in the personnel side. So that's why 200,000 again is in front of us. That would take us backwards or down, however you want to look at
I
it,
think
from
that's
where we
right.
currently
And I
are
think that
today.
initial budget not only said, let's tread water, but it also factored in many of those things that we can't control that we know
Yeah.
historically are going to go up.
Yeah.
Right? And so all together, then you get that initial budget, we go back.
But again, we can't control those, so it's not like we're adding positions, it's not like we're handing out
I mean, if
15% raises.
if we went through medical renewal and we got a 0% increase, which we have had in the past without making any plan design changes, you'd be probably $150,000 to $175,000 closer to that, closer to that goal. So that's why it's definitely challenging in July and August to try to predict what one of your biggest cost drivers may be by November. So, asking you to make some of the difficult decisions about raises versus increases in co-pays and premiums and all that, until we can bring you a clear picture, it's hard to make a specific recommendation.
Ms. Cowdery had some
I was gonna wrap
questions.
up.
I'm sorry, Lawrence.
I'll just wrap up and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, you're not-
if that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Well, I've got, this helps. Thank you for helping me understand the historic, where this money comes from and what it means. For what it's worth, I do believe the discussions we've had this year about fund balance being important are important. I want to try to accomplish that goal. If staff and council believe this is the best way to get to that goal, I support it. If we can find somewhere else to cut the 200 out and put it back into personnel, I'm fine with that too, but I'm not sure we want to just walk away from the fund balance. So that's just I just want to make sure I knew where we were at on this.
Okay.
I remember too when we started this, because I'm so new, but you came with a significant amount of money that we had to make up in this budget. It was like 9 million or something. We had to figure out if we did everything we wanted to do. And we were talking about increasing the ERUs and going through all this stuff and.
Right, that was the famous Martin Riverola presentation.
Capital improvement.
And he just kind
Yes.
of pulled the
And then-
pin, threw it in the middle of the table and said, I don't know what to do with it.
And when you see something that big, it's like, oh, and then we were talking about how we needed to improve our bond rating, so we needed to get our reserves up. So, there were a lot of considerations and nobody here, we all think that the staff works extremely hard, but when you're that short, you just have to, this was part of our process, correct? And I also,
What's that,
just
Susan?
trying to figure out, this is trying to balance.
Not part of my balance, sorry.
Well, yeah, but that's fine, we're increasing the cost to the residents in this budget. So, I just had a couple of, things I wanted to ask you. I remember Mike saying that we did not have to increase the mills on stormwater, on Rock Creek District Number 2 to get the increase on Gateway.
That is correct. We left it there because we were in the midst of our negotiations with the developer at the Gateway. And the way the language currently exists in the development agreement, we can't raise his rate without raising the other district rates. We think we've come up with an assessment formula whereby it will not be 15.5, it'll be 10.5. We can always go down from what we published, but we can't go up. So we started at the
So you're
highest.
gonna leave that in there?
So we put it at the highest that we thought it could go to, but it'll go back down to 10.5.
On Rock Creek Number 2, not on...
Right.
Okay, great, and I remember, well, I know number 1 on this 3/8 sales tax.
What
because
section?
Section 1.1.
Okay, thanks.
And I just, because when it came out of committee, it was like a 1/4 sales tax with the, and then we got to voting on it, and it was 3/8 sales tax.
Pat Quinn got involved.
Pat Quinn. And now, but it was gonna be for Parks and Recs, and that, now this one, again, says something different than I originally understood it was gonna say. This will generate approximately $675,000 per year and would be used to construct a new outdoor swimming pool. So is this, again, just down to a pool vote? Is this what's gonna go on the ballot?
Is that the ballot language, is that what you mean?
Yeah, is
I
this,
presume that it's not about language.
and this
But I
is
think
not, it's just a 3/8 sales tax, and don't worry what it says about it.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that this is not the ballot language, and in a resolution, what we were trying to do is summarize the main points in terms of where we're headed for fiscal year 13. And so there is more to the language, there will be more to the ballot language, but primarily that 3/8 cent sales tax will be used to construct a new pool.
Okay.
Well, and to tag on to what Jennifer is saying, and I think your point here, Jennifer, is that, and my understanding as well, is the 3/8 sales tax was not just for a pool, it was for parks and recreation. Because I believe the recommendation from the pool committee was a $4 million pool. This generates about, yeah, and this generates about $6 million, and I would feel better if this line item said used for parks and recreation.
I just
a
leave
pool
vote on
plus-
something that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not,
You keep
this
changing
seems
the
to,
wording.
yeah, this seems to lock you into it needs to be a pool, and somebody could come back later and said it has to be a pool. And I'd rather this was freed up a little bit to be more reflective of the ballot language.
Okay. Well, I was comfortable with it because it talks about it, for parks and recreation. And again, we are going through this exercise primarily to build a new swimming pool. So if we need to put the word primarily in there. But I also don't want to mislead somebody to say that if you pass 3/8 cent sales tax, we're going to dedicate it all to the community center, because I don't think that's the intent at all of what we pass. So I mean, there's some sort of a balancing act there, I think.
Agreed.
And so maybe use the word primarily.
So we can adjust that language.
Yeah, in the resolution. In fact, I would just recommend that this will generate approximately $675,000 per year and would primarily be used to construct a new outdoor swimming pool.
Yeah.
That adds some clarity.
Yeah, thank you.
This is the way this works.
Yeah. Just checking.
All right. Other,
So what are you gonna do to my number now?
well, I'm waiting for someone to have some.
So I just want to make a clarifying statement about Susie's comment that nobody from the council specifically said it had to be $200,000 out of personnel.
We asked the staff to go back and look at where they could cut across the board, and that's what they came back to us with.
We
Right,
never
right.
took a vote, but in terms of, these conversations have been going on since April, May, and yeah, I guess we waited till after April, but early May. So I think, again, it was a consensus. If the consensus now is 200,000 is too much, we can change it. If 200,000 isn't enough, and there's consensus, we can change it too.
So I am open to it just being $300,000 wherever out of the general fund. I mean, the point I want to make, and specific for the public and everybody else, is that no council member here specifically said we had to cut $200,000 in expenses, personnel expenses. So nobody gave that very directive response. We just said, look at where you can cut and come back to us with a recommendation, and this is what it was. There was no number, no percent, no nothing given. It was just, you guys came back to us with a recommendation.
And there's a variety of factors that made up that money.
Right.
And one is lapsing full-time equivalency time. So if an employee left and we say we didn't fill it for 6 months, that 6 months is added in to come up with a quotient or a number. Those types of things are added in. It's not just a flat fee.
Right, and I think the other part that Laura mentioned earlier was that the real desire to increase our fund balance for a variety of reasons, especially with
I agree.
what you and I are going through every Friday morning, the importance of having a healthy fund balance was the real driver behind that. And again, it's a target. I don't know if it's a magic number, but it's kind of where it's settled into. And
Well, I mean, from our perspective, I think the flexibility, if we have a target number, that gives us greater degree of flexibility to bring you back options between now and the end of the year.
Sure.
If you aren't necessarily tied to those specific categories.
And Ms. Gibbs, does that give you some
Take out the 200,000.
altogether?
Yeah.
So you just want to reduce it by 100,000, the entire general fund,
Yeah.
or expenditures?
Comments by the committee?
Well, and Susie has some really good points on why she wants to do that. As I said earlier, in order, if you do that and just leave the 100 in there, then you've got to go up to number 7 and say you're not going to hold your general fund balance steady. I'm not for that personally. If we want to combine 9 and 10 and do a single line item in the resolution and say decrease $300,000 from the baseline staff budget for 2013 and be more generic with the language, I'm fine with that. But I personally don't want to see us change number 7 and spend more than we're taking out.